There is a reason God has not yet given you the power you have been asking Him for, and it is almost certainly not the reason you think. It is not that He is stingy or distant, or that you have simply not begged hard enough, or prayed the right words, or earned enough of His favor. It is something else entirely, something that will offend you at first, and then if you let it, set you completely free. God will not place His power into a man He cannot yet trust with it. And power in the wrong hands has destroyed more men than weakness ever has. That is what tonight is about, the kind of man God trusts with His power. Because the great mistake of our generation is that we have been chasing the power while ignoring the man, begging God for the anointing while quietly refusing the process that makes a person safe to carry it. We want the gift. God is far more interested in the vessel, and He has never once in all of history poured His real power into a vessel He has not first dealt with. Be honest with yourself for a moment. Most of us who long to be used by God want it, if we are truly honest, at least partly for ourselves. We want the significance of it. We want to matter, to be seen as useful, to feel the weight of being someone God works through. And God, who sees the human heart perfectly, sees that mixture in us, and in His mercy He often withholds. Because to hand real spiritual power to a man who is still secretly seeking his own glory is not a blessing. It is a loaded weapon in the hands of a child. So He waits, and He works. And the very season you have been reading as God's rejection, the obscurity, the smallness, the long delay, may in fact be the surest sign that He intends to trust you with something one day, and is taking the time to make you into the kind of person who will not be destroyed by it. The man whose teaching carries this message understood the danger better than almost anyone. A.W. Tozer was a pastor, largely self-taught, who spent his life warning a gift-hungry church that God does not, and will not, commit His power to the proud, the shallow, or the self-seeking, and that the terrible shortage in the church was never a shortage of talent, but a shortage of men God could actually trust. This message was built on the teachings of A.W. Tozer, and we send it with one honest prayer, that God would use it to turn your eyes off of the power you have been chasing and onto the kind of man He has been waiting to find, not to discourage you, to prepare you. And wherever you are hearing this from, a quiet house in Chicago, a long night in Seattle, the end of a shift in Tampa, a rainy evening in Newcastle, a small flat in Southampton, a car parked somewhere in Edinburgh, a farm in Oklahoma where the nearest town is an hour away. This message is for you. Put the noise down for half an hour, and let God show you what He has really been doing in all that waiting. But first, one word, because there is help waiting for you tonight. If you long to become the kind of person God can actually trust and use, to be made, day by day, into a vessel with real depth instead of just borrowed noise, then we built something to help you begin exactly that, and today it comes with a gift. It is called the War Room Manual, 30 days that take you by the hand and rebuild your walk with God from the ground up, in the secret place where God does His deepest work on a man, with a simple daily plan, an audio guide to walk beside you, and a journal to keep you honest. And today it comes with 3 exclusive companion books, completely free to get you started. You will find it in the link in the description below, or in the very first comment pinned right under this video. Go and open it now before the noise pulls you away again. Keep it close and then come back and hear the rest. Because God is still looking for a certain kind of man, and tonight, He may well be looking at you.
Let us begin by overturning the assumption that quietly runs underneath almost all of our thinking about this, because until it is overturned, you will keep chasing the wrong thing forever. We assume that God gives His power to the impressive, to the gifted, the eloquent, the charismatic, the naturally capable, the ones who already look like leaders. And so we spend our lives trying to become more impressive, sharpening the gifts, building the platform, hoping that if we can just become remarkable enough, God will finally entrust us with something. But that is not how God has ever once operated. The gate to God's power is not talent, It is trust. He is not scanning the earth for the most capable. He is searching for the most trustworthy, for the rare man or woman he can hand something dangerous to without watching it destroy them. And those two lists, the impressive and the trustworthy, have almost nothing to do with one another. And make no mistake, real spiritual power is a genuinely dangerous thing, which is exactly why God is so careful with it. Power does not change a man, it magnifies him. It takes whatever is already in the heart and makes it larger, louder, and far harder to resist. Give real power to a proud man, and you do not get a humble leader, you get a tyrant with a following. Give it to a man who secretly loves money, or attention, or the praise of people, and the power simply becomes a more efficient engine for feeding those very things. This is why the world, and tragically the church, is littered with the wreckage of gifted men who were handed influence before their character could hold it, who used the very things of God to build monuments to themselves, and fell and dragged many others down with them. God has watched that happen since the beginning of time, and so in mercy he will not arm what has not first been surrendered. And if you want to see exactly what happens when raw power is placed into a man who was never broken, look no further than Samson. No one in the whole Bible was given more sheer supernatural power, and no one wasted it more tragically, and the reason is written all over his life. He had the gift without the character to carry it. He was strong in body and weak in soul, handed astonishing power over lions and armies while remaining a helpless slave to his own appetites and impulses. He treated the holy gift of God like a personal toy, used it to serve himself, played carelessly with the very source of his strength, until one terrible day he shook himself as at other times, and did not even know that the Spirit of God had quietly departed from him. Samson stands as the permanent warning at the center of this entire subject. Power without character is not a blessing at all, but a loaded gun pointed straight back at the man who holds it. God saw 1,000 Samsons coming, and it is out of love, and never out of stinginess, that he so often says, "Not yet, not until I have made you into someone this will not destroy." This is why God almost always deals with the man long before he ever uses the man, and the dealing is rarely pleasant. Look at the pattern that runs straight through the scriptures, and you will see it everywhere, without a single exception. Moses spent 40 years in the palace becoming somebody, and then 40 more years in the desert becoming nobody, and it was only the nobody that God could finally use. Joseph was handed a dream of greatness as a boy, and then spent long years in a pit and a household and a prison, being slowly emptied of the very self-assurance that would have ruined him on a throne. David was anointed king and then driven into the wilderness for years, hunted like an animal, being made into the kind of man who could one day hold a crown without it going to his head. Paul was struck blind and utterly undone before he was ever sent out. The making always comes before the using. God takes his time, and he takes it in the hidden years, and he uses them to empty a man of the one thing that makes power lethal, himself. So the man God trusts with his power is, first and last, a broken man. Not a weak man, not an incompetent or spineless man, but a man who has been broken of his own self-will, emptied of his own ambition, brought all the way to the end of his own strength and cleverness and self-reliance. Tozer said it about as plainly as it can ever be said, that God cannot use a man greatly until he has first wounded him deeply. The wound is not cruelty, it is preparation. It is God draining out the self-confidence that would have taken the credit so that he can pour in a power that will give him back the glory. The broken man has stopped trusting in himself, which is precisely why God can finally begin to trust him. He has nothing left to protect, no reputation to build, no little kingdom of his own to advance. And a man like that is safe, at last, to be filled. And you should know what this breaking actually feels like from the inside, so that you do not mistake it for something going wrong when it is really something going right. It rarely feels holy while it is happening. It usually just feels like failure, like doors closing that you were certain God would open, like being overlooked while less faithful people are promoted right past you, like your confidence draining away, and your plans collapsing, and your own weakness being exposed in ways that genuinely humiliate you. It feels, very often, as though God has abandoned the very thing He once put in your heart. But this is precisely how the emptying works. God is not tearing you down out of anger. He is loosening your grip, one finger at a time, on the self-reliance and the ambition and the desperate need to prove yourself that would have poisoned everything He wants to do through you. What feels like your undoing is actually your preparation. The men God used the most were almost all at some point absolutely certain that God had shelved them for good, in the very season He was quietly getting them ready. And here is the deepest root of the whole matter, the thing that finally determines whether a man is safe with power or not. It comes down to how big God is in His eyes. Tozer built his entire life around one piercing sentence. What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And it is nowhere more true than right here. A man with a low, small view of God will always end up sooner or later with a high view of himself, and a man with a high view of himself cannot be trusted with power for a single moment, because he will inevitably use it to exalt the one he admires most, which is himself. But a man who has caught even a glimpse of the true and towering greatness of God is undone by it. He becomes small in his own eyes, not by straining to be humble, but because he has stood next to something infinite. And a man like that can be handed power safely, because he is far too aware of the giver to ever once mistake it for his own. This is the great test God applies before He entrusts His power to anyone, and it is a test almost no one passes. Will you touch the glory? God has said something about Himself that He will never take back. My glory, He declared, I will not give to another. He shares many things with His people freely and generously, but the one thing He will never share is His glory, and so He watches very carefully to see what a man does with even a little influence. Does he quietly gather the credit to himself? Does he enjoy being admired just a bit too much? Does the praise stick to him, or does he deflect it instinctively back to God? Because the moment a man begins to take the glory for what God is doing, God must, in faithfulness to His own name, withdraw, or that man will be ruined. The person God can trust with His power is the person who has settled it, deep down in the soul, that the glory is not his and never was, and who would genuinely rather be forgotten than steal one single ounce of the honor that belongs to God alone. Look at how far God will actually go to guard that glory, because the story of Gideon shows it plainly. When Gideon gathered an army of 32,000 men to face a vast enemy, God said the army was far too large, and the reason He gave is one of the most revealing sentences in the entire Bible, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, "Mine own hand hath saved me." God was not worried they would lose. He was worried they would win and take the credit. So He reduced that army from 32,000 all the way down to 300, until there was simply no possible way any human being could look at the victory and claim it as their own achievement. That is how jealously God guards His glory, and it is a window straight into the kind of man He trusts. He deliberately, again and again, chooses the weak, the few, the unlikely, the ones who could never boast, precisely so that when the power falls and the victory comes, there is no confusion whatsoever about whose it was. So if you feel too small, too weak, too unqualified to ever be used, you may be far closer to the truth than you know. Those are often the exact conditions God is looking for, because they leave no room at all for a man to steal what belongs to God. And God does not discover the trustworthiness of a man out in public. He discovers it in secret, in the small things, in the long stretch of obscurity that almost everyone despises and almost everyone tries desperately to skip. He that is faithful in that which is least, Jesus said, is faithful also in much. The two are bound together, and there is no shortcut between them. Before God ever trusts a man with much, he watches patiently what that man does with little in the dark, when no one is applauding and nothing seems to be happening at all. Will he serve when no one sees it? Will he stay faithful in the hidden assignment that will never make him famous? Will he keep showing up in the secret place, tending the unglamorous, obeying in the small and unnoticed things? Because the man who is faithful only when he is being watched can never be trusted with power, but the man who has proven faithful across the years no one saw is a man God can finally begin to promote. The obscurity is not God forgetting you. It is God testing you quietly for something far larger. And do not miss where all of this preparation actually takes place, because it is the very same place we keep returning to, and for a reason. God makes the men he trusts in secret, in the hidden hours, in the private disciplines that no one else ever sees. It is in the secret place of prayer that a man is slowly emptied of himself and filled with a right and towering view of God. It is in the unseen years of quiet obedience that his character is patiently forged. It is in the hidden life, far from any audience, that he learns to want the giver more than the gift, and to hand the glory back to God almost as a reflex. You simply cannot build this kind of character out in public, under the lights, in a hurry. It is grown in the dark, alone with God, the very same way a root is grown, which means that the one thing most people are so eager to skip in their rush toward power, the hidden life with God, is the single place where the kind of man God trusts with power has ever actually been made. And there is one more mark of the man God trusts, and it is easy to miss because it looks so unremarkable. He is a man under authority. A Roman centurion once astonished Jesus by understanding this better than anyone in all of Israel. He said, "I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes." He had grasped the secret that spiritual authority flows only to those who are themselves under authority, that a man can only truly command what he has first learned to obey. The man God trusts with his power is not a free agent, running his own program in God's name. He is a man who has bent his own will low under God's, who has learned the deep, unglamorous discipline of obedience in the small things, who does not need to be in charge and does not chafe under submission. God does not hand his power to independent men, to lone rangers busy building their own little kingdoms with his name stamped on the front. He entrusts it to the surrendered, to those who have proven over years that they will do what he says, his way, in his timing, whether anyone is watching them or not. And understand that this runs in the exact opposite direction from everything the world will ever teach you about power. The world says the way up is up, promote yourself, push forward, grasp, climb, build your brand, make yourself impossible to ignore, and seize the influence you want. But the kingdom of God runs on a completely inverted principle, and Jesus stated it flatly: whoever humbles himself will be exalted, and whoever exalts himself will be brought low. In God's economy, the way up is always down. The path to being trusted with much begins with being genuinely willing to be nothing. The man who claws his own way to power in the flesh may well get a kind of power, but it will not be the power of God, and it will not last, and it will not truly bless anyone. The man who takes the low place instead, who serves in obscurity, who lets God do the lifting in God's own time, is the one into whose hands real, lasting, God-given power is finally safe to fall. So stop straining to climb. Start letting yourself be lowered. That is the only staircase that has ever led to the kind of power worth having. Now understand that there is a counterfeit of all of this, and it is everywhere, and it deceives millions. It is entirely possible to manufacture a kind of power that looks, for a while, like the real thing. You can generate excitement with the right techniques, move a crowd with charisma and emotion and skillful production, build a following on talent alone, and call it the power of God, when it is nothing of the sort. Tozer grieved over this constantly, a church learning to produce, by purely human means, a convincing substitute for what only God can give, and slowly losing the ability to tell the difference between the two. But manufactured power has no root, and it cannot do what the real thing does. It can excite people, but it cannot transform them. It can gather a crowd, but it cannot make hell tremble. And it always, eventually, collapses, because there was never anything underneath it but a man. The real power is given, not generated. It comes only from God, and it comes only to the kind of man God can trust, and there is no technique on earth that can counterfeit the genuine article for long. And we must be honest about why we chase the power so hard in the first place, because our very hunger for it often reveals that we are not yet ready to hold it. If we search our hearts truthfully, much of our longing to be used by God is tangled up with a longing to simply be somebody. We want the significance. We want to feel that our lives matter, and being visibly used by God can feel like the ultimate proof that they do. But that is exactly the mixture that makes power so dangerous, and God, who loves us far too much to feed our idols, very often withholds, precisely because he sees it. He will not give us a thing that would only deepen our bondage to ourselves. And so the very withholding that feels so much like rejection is often his mercy in disguise, refusing to hand us something that, in our current condition, we would only use to try to fill a hole that he alone was ever meant to fill. And underneath every other qualification is this one, which may well be the truest test of all. God can finally trust his power to the man who wants the giver more than the gift. As long as you want the power more than you want God himself, you are not yet safe with it, because the very moment you had it, it would become your treasure, your identity, the thing you could not live without, and it would quietly slip into the place in your heart that belongs to God alone. But when a man has come to the place where he would genuinely rather have God with no power than all the power in the world without God, where the nearness of the Lord himself has become sweeter to him than any gift the Lord could ever give, then something has shifted that changes absolutely everything. Now the power, if it comes, will not own him, because his heart is already anchored in the giver and not in the gift. That is the man God can trust, not the one still frantically chasing the power, but the one who has fallen so deeply in love with God that he could honestly take it or leave it, and would choose God either way. And there is a reason the man God trusts can actually be trusted, beyond even his brokenness and his humility. And it is this: he has finally understood what the power is really for. It was never given to make him great. It was given to serve. Real spiritual power is always a stewardship, never a possession. It is entrusted, not owned, and it is entrusted for the blessing of others and the glory of God, never once for the exaltation of the one who happens to carry it. The man God trusts knows deep down that he is only a channel and not a reservoir, a servant handling something that belongs entirely to his master, and so he holds it with open hands and a sober heart. That is precisely why he does not grasp it, or flaunt it, or trade on it, or use it to build himself up. He knows with total clarity that it was never his in the first place. Give power to a man who thinks it is for him, and he will consume every drop of it on himself. Give it to a man who knows it is for others, and God can pour through him without limit, because there is nothing left in him trying to keep any of it back. So if you find yourself in one of those long, obscure, frustrating seasons right now, where you have prayed and prayed for God to use you and it feels like heaven has gone completely silent, hear this, because it may be the most important thing you hear tonight. That silence may not be rejection at all. It may be preparation. The delay may not mean that God has passed you over. It may mean He is taking the time to make you into someone He can safely trust with what He is actually planning to do. The greatest servants God ever raised up almost all went through this exact thing, a long, hidden season that felt like being overlooked and forgotten, and was in reality being forged and made ready. God is never in a hurry, because He is not merely trying to get a task done. He is trying to make a man. And if you are being emptied and humbled and kept small right now, do not despise it, and whatever you do, do not run from it. It may be the surest evidence you will ever have that God intends to trust you with much. And hear this if you hear nothing else tonight. God's not yet is never God's never, never God's. When God withholds power from a man, He is in the middle of preparing. It is not a closed door, it is only a delayed one, held shut for a little while longer, until the man behind it is finally ready to walk through without being crushed by what waits on the other side. God develops before He ever deploys. He is not withholding the gift in order to torment you. He is withholding it only until the giving of it would be a mercy to you and not a disaster. So do not read His patience as His rejection. The Father is not standing over you with folded arms, coldly deciding whether you are worthy enough yet. He is at work inside you, right now, in the very waiting you resent, quietly making you into the exact person to whom He is longing, one day soon, to finally say yes. And so I have to say the hard thing plainly. Do not envy the power you see in others, and do not chase it as an end in itself, because the chase itself will slowly deform you. There have been men who received power without ever once being broken, who somehow got the gift and skipped the process, and it did not save them. It destroyed them, and very often everyone around them as well. It is a far better and safer thing to be a small, hidden, faithful vessel that God can genuinely trust than to be a powerful, unbroken one standing one short step away from a fall. The goal was never the power. The goal was always to become the kind of person into whose hands that power would finally be safe. Chase that, and the rest will come, in God's own time, if He wills it. Chase the raw power itself, and you may well get it, and live to wish with all your heart that you never had. So here is the invitation, and it will cost you your ambition and hand you back your soul. Stop asking God merely to give you power, and start asking Him instead to make you into the kind of person He can trust with it. Submit to the breaking when it comes, rather than running from it. Let Him empty you of the self that would only take the credit. Be faithful in the small, hidden, unnoticed things. Across the years no one is watching, and do not despise the obscurity, because that is the very ground where God quietly makes the men He uses. Get low. Get honest. Give Him the glory now, before you ever have a single thing to be glorified for. Become in secret the kind of vessel that real power would be safe inside of. And then leave the timing and the filling and the whole of it entirely up to Him. Because God is still doing today exactly what He has done in every single generation, searching the whole earth, not for the most gifted or the most impressive or the most ambitious, but for a man or a woman He can trust. The eyes of the Lord, the Scripture says, run to and fro throughout the whole earth, looking for the heart that is wholly His. That search has never once stopped. He is still looking tonight. And the only question that finally matters is not how talented you are or how visible or how far along you have come, but whether you will let Him make you into the kind of person He is looking for. So let Him empty you and humble you and prove you in the dark and give Him the glory now, while no one at all is watching. Become the man God can trust. and then leave it entirely to Him to decide what and when He will finally pour into your hands.